All right, so you're here in the right place if you're looking for the webinar on the rage and guilt of PTSD. In order to understand the rage and the ensuing guilt of PTSD, let's talk about PTSD generally. And if I can just ask you a question, who's the demographic? Who's the biggest demographic in Australia that is likely to suffer from PTSD? Could you just type in? Middle-aged men, Chris Prell, interesting. Police, yes, Faye. Sexual abuse victims, yes, Heidi. Anyone? Thank you, Rosalind. Aboriginals, certainly. First responders, yes. Across the board, says Jan. Leonie, anyone? Army, Faye, yes. Oh, yeah, defence, of course. Fran, paramedics, health staff, yes. Men, given the protector roles they undertake. Thank you, Kylie. Clients who've experienced trauma, Kim, yes. Refugees, oh, hello. Addicts, yes, Rosalind. So many, all the studies show that most addicts have childhood trauma and they're just self-medicating because of the pain. All right. And people have said first responders, refugees. There's a particular demographic that's very much at risk, and that's those who've been through domestic violence, those who've suffered abuse as children. They're a huge demographic. Of course, there's first responders, police, fireys, ambos, military, and of course, refugees. And there are so many who've been through childhood abuse. Certainly those who've been in, so there are people in characters, people who've gone through natural disasters like the Black Saturday bushfires. But there is a big demographic that are often overlooked who suffer from PTSD. Those who've gone through domestic violence and those who've suffered childhood abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, physical violence, etc. So it's not just the military or paramedics or first responders. All right, now let's look at PTSD generally again. We could go through, yes, Margaret, people with disability suffering at the hands of carers. There have been some horrific stories coming out. Let's talk about PTSD generally. We could go through a list of symptoms, but that doesn't really give us a keen understanding of what PTSD is and why it happens. We could go through the PCL, the PTSD checklist, and we know that people with PTSD suffer from hypervigilance, sleeping problems, nightmares, avoidance, flashbacks, etc. And of course, PTSD is a spectrum, as with depression, as with anxiety. People with depression, there's low levels of depression and there's catatonic states. There's people with low levels of anxiety and people with off-the-charts anxiety, panic attacks, etc. And of course, PTSD is classed in that anxiety disorder category. So in order to really understand PTSD, let's not just look at the symptoms, let's go to the graph. And I know that a lot of people have seen the graph before. Well, guess what? It never does any harm to see it again. For those who haven't seen it before, tune in, take special note here. Here's one I prepared earlier. So just moving this across here so you can see it completely. All right. So here is the graph. Let's look at a normal person, if such a being exists. So we have a normal person lives down here at calm. They go along. They have a stressful event. They release stress hormones, stress chemicals, adrenaline, etc. The event passes and this happens without having to go and meditate for 5 days to bring the system back to calm. Once the event is over, the system self-regulates, and this is key for a normally functioning human being. They have a life-threatening event. They go up here to fight, flight, freeze. The event passes. And once again, they don't have to do anything. They don't have to take meds. They don't have to be mindful. This happens automatically, this self-regulation. And this is the key. Because what happens when someone gets stuck in PTSD is they get stuck up here at fight, flight, freeze, continually re-triggering. Never does their self-regulation switch on. Instead, their amygdala is, the emergency services in the brain is going off all the time, danger. And they're triggering all the time, and there's not a lot of rest in there. So the amygdala fires, the emergency services fires, the adrenals release adrenaline, etc., etc. The adrenaline surges through the body. The circulation is redirected from the major organs to the big muscle groups so that we're ready for fight or flight. And so a lot of people with PTSD have gut problems. Why? Because when you're running from a Tyrannosaurus Rex, you don't need to digest breakfast. So our digestion shuts down because the body's trying to conserve energy so that we survive. So the systems within the body that use up a lot of energy are shut down or greatly reduced. So digestion is one system that suffers. Another thing that happens is our brain uses up 1/3 of our energy, and we don't need to do higher maths when we're running away from a Tyrannosaurus Rex. So our frontal lobe shuts down, the instinctive part, the reptilian part of the brain lights up, and we work on instinct. So we flip our lid, basically. The other thing that happens when that brain shuts down is the hippocampus shuts down. And the hippocampus is responsible for taking short-term memory and putting it in long-term memory. Closing the door on the warehouse of memory and saying, you know what, it's over, and we can get on with our lives. That never happens. Now this, as I said, is a spectrum. It goes from low-level PTSD to off-the-charts PTSD. And what does that feel like? It's like the brake and the accelerator, pedal to the metal 24/7. Freeze and flight and fight all going at once. And it's very uncomfortable, it's very exhausting, and the system starts to break down. The physical impact over time is horrendous. So as I was saying, the hippocampus doesn't put the event into memory. Instead, what happens is the unconscious the event is stored in the unconscious as if it's still going. It's happening now, it's happening now, it's happening now. The fire is coming now. He's coming at me with a knife now. I'm being raped now. Whatever it is, it's as if it's happening now, and the unconscious or you can call it the subconscious. You say tomato, I say tomato. Doesn't matter, unconscious, subconscious. The unconscious runs every chemical reaction, every electrical response in the body. And so the body is responding as if that event is happening right now. Consciously, we're not aware of it because it's this videotape loop and that videotape loop and that videotape loop running in the unconscious. It does break through into the conscious mind with extreme PTSD in the form of flashbacks. Flashbacks are not just an unpleasant memory. Flashbacks are a lived re-experiencing. We have a flashback, we relive the dreadfulness that happened. So in all of this, from low-level PTSD to extreme, the entire system is screaming, I'm not safe. I'm not safe, therefore I cannot relax, I cannot sleep. When I do sleep, I'm not safe, so I have nightmares. I'm under siege. At every moment, I feel like I'm under siege. I can't relax. I can't sit with my back to a door. I often get a lot of people, they start to look like they have Parkinson's because they tremble all the time. It's very exhausting. So what also happens here, with the whole system screaming, I'm not safe, the biggest, most difficult to live with symptom of PTSD is not the hypervigilance. It's not the continual anxiety. It's not the gut problems. It's not the headaches. It's not the sleep, the lack of sleep. The biggest, most difficult symptom to live with PTSD for the sufferer is the rage. It's also the most difficult symptom for the people who live with those who experience PTSD. For the loved ones, for the partners, for the children, for the cat and the dog. Because everyone's walking on eggshells and no one knows when this solar flare of rage is going to erupt. And let's talk about that solar flare of rage. Who here works with anger management? I know that somebody said that they did back here. Could you just type in if you work in the area of anger management? Anger. Just type in anger. Yes, Rosin, yeah, or just yes. Rosin, that's great, thank you. Does anybody else work in the area of anger management? Fiona, thank you. All right, and if you raise your hand, there's nothing I can do about it, sorry. If you can just type in yes. If you squiggle your cursor at the bottom of the screen, you'll see the chat icon. If you click on that, and then you can type in, yeah, so there's just a couple of people. Oh, Renee, good, thank you, Renee. Oh, good, thank you. Quite a number of people. Rebecca, Arena, what a beautiful name. So let's talk about the different types of anger, because there's not one size fits all. And thank you for raising your hand, but I can't actually call on you in this system. You'll have to type in. Chris Tay, yes. You're also an anger person, someone who works with anger management. There are two different types of anger. There's the slow burn of, well, there's several actually, but there's the slow burn of growing resentment. There's the slow brewing of irritation, of frustration. And for all of these, irritation, resentment, frustration, often it builds up, and then there's a Vesuvius that happens. Now that's a type of anger that we can catch before there's a Vesuvius, because we can learn to understand the signals, the clenched fist, the tight muscles, the clenched jaw, the racing heartbeat, the sweating. But there's a different type of anger. And this is the anger of PTSD. And we need to understand, especially if we're working in the area of anger management, we need to understand the very big difference between normal anger that grows, that brews, and the anger of PTSD, the rage of PTSD. The rage of PTSD, there's no lead up to it. There's no noticing that you're getting irritated, that you're getting frustrated, that your muscles are starting to tense up, that your jaw's starting to, there's no physiological or psychological lead up. It's like throwing a lit match at petrol. And it's as fast as that. It's from 0 to 1,000 miles an hour in a nanosecond. And there may be no trigger. There may be no trigger, no external trigger. I understand about this extreme PTSD. How do I know about it? It's because I was there. For many, many years, I lived with that extreme PTSD and those lit match at petrol instances that were so regular. And I would be driving along quite happily by myself in the car sometimes. You know, okay, doing okay, congratulating myself, I'm doing okay. And then it'd be like a nuclear explosion of rage within me. And I would, windows up, just be screaming with rage by myself, burning down the motorway. There needn't actually be a trigger. And if we're with people, it can be the tiniest little thing. It can be just small. It can be something that someone says without meaning anything. But bang, it happens and there's no lead up, there's nothing to control, and there you are and you're in it. So what happened to me, that I was living in extreme PTSD, and some have heard this story before, I'm sorry, but for those who haven't. So I had a life that was remarkable in its ridiculousness. So I was the youngest of 8 in a Catholic family, and I had several violently incestuous older brothers, and we were Catholic. Did I mention we were Catholic? And so there were priests, and there were very eminent priests who used to stay at our house, and there were many priests who would come to visit. And they used to come to visit because they're little children. And my sister and I were often marked out. And my sister and I are the ones in my family who suffered from the incest and suffered from the priests. I went on to be drugged and sexually assaulted by a Catholic nun. And then there were stalkers. You know, lots of things happened. And then I worked my way up through the hierarchy of violent lunatics until I found myself with a homicidal psychopath who was into torture. And that went on for 9 years. So he was into cutting. Lots of other things happened, which I won't go into, but that's just the general condensed Reader's Digest version. At the end of that time, I was physically very injured and physically very ill, and the surgeons put my body back together as best they could and said I'd be in chronic ill health and chronic pain for the rest of my probably very short life. So I've lost a lot of my insides, but here I am, and I get more healthy every year. After my physical body broke down and I had lots of surgery and everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong, I found myself in extreme PTSD to the point of madness, where I went into split personality and living in hallucinations, living in psychosis. And that's how I came to find out how to fix it. And so I understand this. And I understand how to step through to the other side of this. And I understand the difference between normal anger and this absolute off-the-planet rage and what happens. So could you just type in, is anybody here lived with PTSD? Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Faye. Has anybody here personally suffered from PTSD? Fran, thank you. Anybody else have a personal experience, lived experience of PTSD? Right, okay, Fran, your husband. Renee. Yvonne, thank you. So a few people here. That's great. There's nothing like lived experience, isn't there? I look at my own lived experience as having been such a gift. Yeah, my child also, Fiona. My child, extreme, severe. Right, thank you. It's awful, isn't it? And there is an answer. There is an answer, and it's quite simple, and we'll get there. But I really would love every person who works in mental health or in health to understand that the rage of PTSD is different. And by illustration, I'm just going to tell a story. So just imagine, let's put ourselves in the place of the person with PTSD. So just imagine that it's a typical Saturday afternoon in a family home. There's mum, dad, 2 kids, and a cat and a dog. Everything's fine. The kids are doing their thing. Mum's doing her thing. Dad's doing his thing in a big, open kitchen, lounge room, dining room area. And everything's fine. And mum says something innocuous to dad. Just something small. And bang, that lit match at petrol. And what happens is dad dissociates. And it's like watching a slow-moving car wreck as he basically watches himself in his rage explode into hostility, explode with extraordinary rage that he can't control. There was no lead up. He comes to, he comes back, he reassociates to find his wife between him and the children. The children are under the table, hiding from dad. His wife is between him and them so that they don't get hurt. The dog and the cat are under the lounge. And he comes to. And he realizes that the people who he loves most in all the world are terrified of him. Absolutely terrified of him. And this is where the guilt kicks in. Sorry, I get a bit emotional because I've been there. This is where the guilt kicks in, and he thinks, you know what? The people I love would be better off without me. I'm a risk. They'd be better off without me. And so he goes and suicides. This happens so often. Now, just imagine, okay, the scene has frozen when he comes to and realizes what has happened. So you can see his face. And now that face changes into a woman's face. And it was mum with the PTSD. And mum who's just gone off. And mum who comes to with her husband between her and the kids, with the kids behind him protecting those kids. And she realizes, the people I love the most, I'm not an asset, I'm a liability. They would be so much better off without me. I can't keep doing this to them. They're terrified of me. They're living in a prison that I am creating with my rage, and I can't do anything about it. I don't know what to do. And these people go to anger management and are taught to notice the build-up, that they're getting into that zone. But there is no zone. There's no zone. And that's the key. It's just bang, like a solar flare, like lit match at petrol. And so the ensuing guilt kills people, kills lots of people. Not just in the military, but everyday people. What do we do with it then? What should we do about this rage which has no build-up and that is like a nuclear explosion where there is no control, which is so over the top? Certainly it kills relationships, friend. Does that? Definitely does that. Margaret, are you saying there is awareness of the happenings but no control? Yes. Margaret. Yes. I used to despise myself because my rage would be aimed at, and that's what happens. This rage just breaks through. And who does it hit? The people who are closest to us, because they're the ones who are physically around us. Who used to get it from me? My son used to get it from me. When did he get it? He would get it if I bought him new clothes and he'd gone and stayed at his dad's and his dad would have cut up his clothes. And he'd come back with a bag full of cut up clothes. It wasn't my kid's fault. But I would just bang. And my kid was terrified of me. My son was terrified of me. All sorts of things would happen. I would be aware that it was happening, and inside I'd be going, no, like, you know, those movies, no. And I'd come back to myself with the rage spent and think, what have I done? Was I suicidal? Absolutely. My son would be so much better off without me. The whole planet would be better off without me. I didn't know I had PTSD. I just knew there was something very wrong with me. A lot of people have undiagnosed PTSD and they don't understand this and about the rage. This is why anger management won't cut it, people. I've spoken to so many hundreds of mental health practitioners who specialize in anger management. And I've said to them, do you sit in front of some groups, some of your clients, and you just get frustrated because they're non-compliant? You give them the tools and they come back and they've had outbursts of rage which they haven't reined in. And the practitioner, the therapist who doesn't understand the rage of PTSD just thinks that they're a non-compliant client and they don't really want to do anything about their rage. That they're not determined enough, that they're not motivated enough. But it's a different thing. It's not under the control of the conscious mind. It's an eruption that erupts from the deep unconscious. There is no way to consciously control it because bang, it's there. It's like watching ourselves in a slow motion train wreck and then we come to. There is a way of fixing it. It's not through normal anger management techniques. Faye, someone here is saying, I slapped my daughter a few times when she was a toddler and I wanted to die. I didn't do it again. Faye, I understand that so much. There are so many parents, not just mums, but parents who have trauma issues and they find themselves whacking their kids or going so far over the top with discipline or getting cross. I told this story last week on another webinar, but I'll tell it again. There was a young mum in Bunnings and she had a couple of kids and I could see she was about to go off. So I just stayed close. I went into the same aisles that she was going in and just waited for the inevitable. And then it happened. And she started to whack into those kids and people were so shocked and horrified. This dreadful mother, this dreadful woman. And I just went up to her and I hugged her. I said, are you okay? She said, no. So I gave her my card and said, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not a bad mother. We can fix this. And so many of us have this, we just snap. And it happens so often with a trauma background. Kim, can I ask, is there always insight post-episode? No. For good people who have some self-awareness and have good hearts, yes, there is awareness. Yvonne, yes, intergenerational trauma, of course. The science of epigenetics has proven that trauma is passed down from generation to generation to generation. And some families say, well, we just have temper issues in our family and it gets passed down. we just lose our temper, just bang like that. Well, it's not a temper issue. It's a trauma issue. Resolve the trauma, and the symptoms simply disappear. Is this Nuria? I hope that's how you pronounce your name, Nuria. Is this sudden explosion of anger and rage always related to PTSD? It may not be full-blown PTSD, but when a client comes to me or somebody I've spoken to, we have to ask, when they come and say, I have an anger issue, the first question that we ask is, tell me about your anger. Is it like the slow build-up of resentment, or the slow build-up of irritation, or the slow build-up of frustration? Or is it bang, lit match at petrol? And if they go, that's the one it is. It's just, there's no build-up. It's just bang, and I have no control. It's just over the top, just horrendous. Then we know it's a trauma issue. They may not have full-blown PTSD, but they will definitely have a trauma issue. What then do we do about it? We do not teach them how to observe their heart rate getting higher, flooding, tension, physical tension. We don't teach them that. There is no point. This is beyond our conscious will. Willpower will not do anything for this. Awareness will not do anything because there is no build-up. So I'll stop raving on about that, but it's just a really big point I wanted to get across. What do we have to do? It's very, very simple. And this is what I learned in going through my own madness. We have to bring someone from I'm not safe to it's over. And I'm safe now. We have to bring them from here back to here, where the body kicks in again with its self-regulation after a distressing event. So let's take away the word trauma, because people think trauma, they think emergency services, they think refugees, they think defence force personnel, and certainly there is so much trauma in those arenas. But if we say distressing events, we get a much greater grasp of what this is actually all about. Fran's saying, can see the anger build up in my children as they exhibit the same symptoms as their father. Their trauma is what their father has done to them. Yes, absolutely. And perhaps his father did it to him. And so it goes. So how do we get this self-regulation switch to switch on? How do we stop these outbursts? It's very, very simple. So as I was saying, when we have a distressing event and the hippocampus gets overwhelmed and it doesn't take that event and put it in the warehouse of memory and shut the door. Instead, the event gets stored like a videotape loop in the unconscious. And there's that event. And there's that event. And there's that event. And then there's little events. And there's medium-sized distressing events. There's all these events going in our unconscious. Are we consciously aware of them? No, only in the breakthroughs into the conscious mind from the unconscious, the breakthroughs into the conscious mind in the form of flashbacks in extreme PTSD. What happens is the distress of life builds up. All these videotape loops, they build up like the pressure in a balloon. And at some point, and if there's a big event, it will blow out into PTSD. You can only put so much pressure on a system and it will just blow out. They've done studies on twins going to war and experiencing the same events, and one twin will have PTSD and one won't. Why? Because the pressure in the twin with PTSD, his balloon was more full because he'd had more dreadful things happen to him than the other twin. So Jan is saying, so this buildup of stress is largely out of control because the hippocampus is not functioning. Yes, due to a stressed brain and body. You've got it in one, Jan. It has switched off. Some people, well, everyone with PTSD has another symptom, which is craft. I'll just write it up here. I'm just digressing a moment, but craft. Can't remember a flippin' thing. Why? Because the hippocampus is shut down. It's not functioning properly. The unconscious has given a directive, and the unconscious runs every chemical reaction, every electrical response in the body. And the unconscious has given a directive to the conscious mind, don't remember. And it's not just don't remember about that event and that event and that event, it's just a blanket don't remember. The hippocampus is offline and we can't remember. When I was in the extremes of PTSD, I used to have to look at my phone all the time to try and remember who I'd just rung or who I'd rung the night before, because I had no memory at all. I wouldn't allow myself to turn on the stove. I would allow myself to boil water in the electric jug, an electric kettle, but I wouldn't allow myself to cook anything because I would put something on the stove and walk away to go to the loo or something and then just go and do something else. I would forget altogether that I was in the middle of cooking until I could smell burning and there was smoke and I couldn't remember a flippin' thing. And this is typical with extreme PTSD. And there are lots and lots of people walking around with undiagnosed PTSD. And most domestic violence situations are because somebody has PTSD. And it's not just the man who's violent. There are so many women. I've had men clients who've been stabbed through the abdomen or had boiling water poured over their heads or different things. But a lot, I'm not saying all, because there are some bastards that are just evil bastards and there's no hope for them. But a lot of people who are perpetrators of domestic violence have PTSD. They have a big trauma issue, which causes that of rage. And you know, it's a funny thing. Hurt people hurt people. I used to specialize in violent, angry men brought against their will. You know, the ones that had been under house arrest for a couple of days, with the men in their family, making sure that they were secure. They wouldn't let them out because that man that they were house arresting was hell-bent on going and killing their ex and the new boyfriend and the children. We see it in the paper all the time. And these angry, angry men would be brought in, frog-marched in by the men in their family and sat in front of me, and they were not exactly a compliant client. They just wanted to go and kill people, and you freaking old granny, freaking, you know, that, and they'd go on. And within an hour and a half to 2 hours, they would be safe and everyone in their family would be safe and no one would be hurt. I had one client who was pulled off strangling his wife, ex-wife, that morning. He'd smashed every window in her house, every panel in her car, and broken her guitar over his head. He walked in like Frankenstein with big gashes and dried blood, tall and skinny. And after a couple of hours, there was no more rage. And that was 7 years ago, and he's never had a rage outburst since. So I follow these guys, and they become my boys, I call them. No rage. They might get a bit irritated, but no rage. Why? Why? How can you bring somebody that quickly from a homicidal, suicidal rage? It's very simple. You simply turn off the biggest videotape loops. And like a four-legged table that you take one leg out of, all of the others just turn off. And the symptoms simply disappear because the rage is a symptom. It's not the issue, it's a symptom of a trauma problem. And by doing that, turning off those videotape loops, we return the whole being that is screaming, I'm not safe. We return the whole being to, it's over, and I'm safe now. It's not rocket science. Margaret, are people with ADHD or other diagnoses of this type susceptible to PTSD? Their brain's already on overload in many instances. It's a funny thing, Margaret. A little while ago, I had a phone call from a medical doctor who said that he had spent many, many years in the area of ADHD research. And he had only just realized that an awful lot of ADHD is actually PTSD. Think about it. It's the same symptoms. I can't focus, I can't think, I can't remember, I'm agitated, I can't relax, I can't sleep, I can't. So I've had so many clients with ADHD who we just turn off their videotape loops in their unconscious, and hey presto, no more ADHD. I'm not saying that all ADHD is a trauma response. I'm just saying that an awful lot of it is. Trump should do TRTP. I think Trump needs a bit more than that, Faye. Good one, though. So does that make sense? This is my model. And then in the first class I taught, and there was a psychiatrist in that class, and she actually cleared her books in 5 weeks. So much so that the receptionist in the medical centre where she specialised, and she specialised in PTSD, she was a trauma specialist. And she cleared her books in 5 weeks, so much so that the receptionist in the big medical centre sent a delegation of receptionists to ask her, what are you prescribing now? Is it legal? And are we implicated by being on the premises? Is there going to be a drug bust? What drugs are you giving your patients now? Because we've been seeing them coming for years and now they're walking out well. We're very concerned. What are you doing? So this psychiatrist told me, so what you're doing is you're taking the work of Peter Levine and Bessel van der Kolk, who both agree that to get somebody from a traumatized state, from PTSD, to a self-regulating state, we have to tell the body it's over. I said, well, they're nearly there. It's the unconscious, because that's where the videotape loops are, and the unconscious runs the body. Hello, we don't have to think about making our heart beat or our lungs breathe or our cells divide. It's over is fine. But there's a different dynamic to it's over and I'm safe now. Say it with me. Just say it with me, and you'll observe your body. Feel what happens in your body when you say with me, it's over. You ready? Say it from your guts. You can close your eyes if you want to. Just say with me, it's over. Good, and say it again. It's over. It feels good. But now, say it's over and I'm safe now, and feel what happens in your body. You ready? I'll say it first and then you say it. It's over and I'm safe now. Now you say it. Ready? It's over and I'm safe now. Once more, and observe what happens. With me, It's over and I'm safe now. It's a different dynamic. And the whole system returns to calm, and the symptoms, because that's what rage is. Rage is a symptom of trauma. And because of that extreme rage, the big guilt kicks in because it's not who we are and we can't control it. So the only thing to do, racked with guilt, people go and commit suicide. It can be stopped like that. It can be stopped like that. We have such a high suicide rate in Australia. The highest cause of death in 14 to 44-year-olds is suicide. Why? Either from the guilt of this or just to stop the pain. Admittedly, there are some who commit suicide just to teach somebody a lesson, just to hurt them. Let's put those aside. The majority is to just stop the pain, or because of the guilt of what we're doing to those we love with this rage that's out of control. There are so many people with PTSD, a couple of million in Australia, and that's only the ones that were diagnosed. 5% of the population, they reckon, have PTSD at some stage. And some people, if you've got extreme PTSD, you're going to be stuck there. Complex PTSD, no problem. It's the same thing. You just turn off all those videotape loops. You only have to turn off the top 3 or 4 of the most distressing events, and the rest just disappear and the symptoms disappear. And you can see someone lose the Parkinson's-like tremor of extreme trauma, extreme PTSD, just like that, and it never comes back. The nightmares, people sleep, people can relax. They go back to self-regulation because stressful events will still happen. Distressing events will still happen, but they'll go back to self-regulation. They won't be stuck up here all the time. And it's a funny thing, their gut gets well, because when you're up here, the whole system is acid and it kills the good fauna and flora. You know, it's been proven there's a big link between gut health and mental health. But what comes first, the chicken or the egg? My model is that it's because of the extreme pressure on the organism that it causes our gut to be acid because we're not working properly, the digestion's not working properly, and that kills all the flora and fauna. And then it becomes a cycle. So it's pretty simple. It's not rocket science. So this is my model. You know, cognitive behavioral therapy doesn't work really well in this arena. Why? Because the trauma is not stored in the cognitive mind. If it was, we would be able to say to ourselves, well, it was 9 years ago, let's get over it. It's not there. It's stored in the unconscious. You cannot control this rage with cognitive process. You cannot control the other symptoms of trauma. So what we do with TRTP, I didn't introduce myself, sorry. For those who don't know me, I'm Judith Richards, and I created the Richards trauma process. I did it first to deal with my own trauma and my son's trauma, which was over the top, because we'd been through extreme trauma, just to say the least. And it works. We know if a model is worth looking at simply by the outcome. If the outcome is good, and this is in 3 sessions. You know, I told you that I used to work with violent, angry men brought against their will who was homicidal, suicidal. I don't encourage anybody else to work in that arena. It was something, I don't know, specific to me. I just had no fear, because you think you're evil, you got nothing. But I used to do it just in 1 session. I broke it down to 3 sessions to make it easier for others to use. And in those 3 sessions, that's what happens. We bring someone from I'm not safe to it's over and I'm safe now. It doesn't just work with PTSD, because I'm not safe is what underlies anxiety. Anyone who's here, who's been in the throes, in the prison of anxiety, knows it's this feeling, something bad's going to happen, something bad, and we catastrophize and we plan. All we have to do for people with anxiety, whether it's low-level anxiety or extreme anxiety peaking with panic attacks, you know what I'm talking about, or low-level anxiety, it's all a spectrum, and it's all caused from the same thing, that we've never stored those dreadful events, and some of them are horrendous, aren't they, in the warehouse of memory and shut the door. They're stored in the unconscious. That's happening now. It's happening now. That's why we're thinking, that's why we're feeling something bad's going to happen, something bad's going to happen, something bad's going to happen. Then we have OCD. If the house will burn down. Did I turn off the stove? Something bad's going to happen. It's the same for depression, which is also a spectrum. People shut down. Fight, flight, anxiety, the hyper-aroused state of anxiety, or freeze, the shutdown state of depression, all caused by the same thing. So this doesn't just work for extreme PTSD, it works for anxiety, depression, OCD. It's very simple. Works a treat. We have our own band of TRTP practitioners who are academics at various universities who are taking the research on. So that's all in process. Our small end point is to change how mental health is done. And so we're doing the research to prove the process. So just going back, looking at people's comments and questions. Anyone Greek speaking who can help people in Greece online? Yes, I'm pretty sure that Mary Lynch, well, I know that Mary's Greek in Sydney, Faye. Yes. So I think that Faye's looking for a TRTP practitioner who can use this process and work with people in Greece online. I'm sure there are some. We have Dutch speakers. We have various other speakers amongst our practitioners. We have people flying in from South Africa, Holland, the UK, Switzerland to our training. We are taking it overseas to various countries next year. Yes, acid reflux and gut issues, yes. Been saying to kids for years, you're safe, it's over and it works in residential care. Yes, and we have to say it to them in their unconscious. There are ways of working with kids. Can children do TRTP? Children are very easy to work with this process, Nuria. I hope I'm saying your name right. But we do it differently with children. And children are very fast to recover, but we do it very differently with children. It's very short process. And we have TRTP practitioners who specialize in working with children. And, you know, it's a funny thing. You can take a sick fish out of a sick pond, clean it up, put it in a happy, healthy, clean pond, and that little fish will thrive and grow. Take a fish from a dirty pond, a toxic pond, clean it up, put it back in that toxic pond, and guess what happens? Get sick. Get sick again. So when we work with children, we work with at least one caregiver who's a constant caregiver for that child, dealing with their stuff so that they can create the safe pond for the child. So if we're working with a child who has parents, we work with at least one parent first before we work with the child. I hope that makes sense. To create that safe pond to put that little child into so they don't go back into a toxic pond and get sick again. Yes, Mary Lynch, friend. You are saying my name. Oh, good, Nuria, that's good. Who is the closest practitioner in Byron? Mariah, if you go to the practitioner directory, you can find practitioners around the place. Nika, N-E-I-K-A-H, is in Byron. Nika, N-E-I-K-A-H, and her last name is just gone. But the other thing is that just about every TRTP practitioner works online. This is just as effective online as it is face-to-face. As long as someone's got a good internet connection and a headset on, we have a headset on, and the client has a headset on, it's just as effective. So if your 9-year-old's into technology, as most of them are, they can work with one of our children's specialists, Paula Zalkberg in Melbourne, who's a mental health social worker, specialises in children. She's fabulous. Paula Zalkberg, Z-A-L-C-B-E-R-G. Can you explain the freeze word? Jan, fight, flight, freeze. We see it in, say you've got a lion that grabs an impala. And the impala plays possum. It looks like it's dead. What can happen is the predator can stash the impala. The lion can stash the impala, but the impala can come to and shake, and off they can go again. The freeze response is getting ready for death. In its most extreme, that's what it's doing. In depression, it's not quite there yet. However, I worked with a very depressed woman who couldn't move more than 2 blocks from her home. If she moved more than 2 blocks, she would go into a dead faint. Freeze response. The vagus nerve to the heart kicks in and takes the person down. And it's a spectrum from low levels of depression to catatonic to these vagal episodes of dead fainting, when the being thinks, when the person, the unconscious thinks that they're not safe. I'll take them down. I've seen that a lot. Anyone in Tasmania? No, not as yet. Yvonne? I just got YV here. Yvette? Yvonne? No one in Tasmania yet. We have about 200 practitioners around Australia and a few around the world. Does the client need to remember or know each of the trauma? No, they don't. No, they don't. Yvonne, thanks, Yvonne. They don't need to understand. Some people don't remember anything before the age of 12. They don't need to. We certainly don't create remembered false memories, so they don't need to. But if this is something that calls to you, if this hits the spot for you, if it makes sense, come and join us, because our mental health system, I'm just going to say it like it is, it's fucked, people. I'm sorry, but I'm going to swear, but it is. And we all know it. We all know it. There are so many people being turned away from hospital emergency centres, and who say, help me, I'm suicidal, and no beds, or no, you'll be right. And what they do, like my cousin last year went and jumped off a bridge and was fished out quite dead the next morning. We have to do something different. We have a moral obligation to do something different. And this works. 3 to 4 sessions, as long as the client engages, done and dusted. We are creating a revolution in mental health. Come and join us. We need to get people well. You do this process with one traumatized mum, and the dynamics of every relationship in that family change. Families come to life. There is a tsunami of pain out there. You know, the science of epigenetics showing that trauma is passed down from generation to generation to generation. Well, just look at what happened last century. We had 2 world wars, we had holocausts, we had nuclear bombs, we had, you know, there are Aboriginals today who are older now who were toddlers when their tribe was wiped out. Hello? Have you noticed that what we're doing isn't working? Have you noticed? It sounds too good to be true. It's very simple. Some of the greatest inventions of the world sounded too good to be true. They were simple. This is simple. It works. Do come and join us. We have a moral responsibility to use what works. We will change how mental health is done on this planet. Okay, what do you do? Someone's saying, what do you do? Go to the website. You'll need a cut lunch to type this one in, but I'm going to write it up. The Richards. I'm Judith Richards. Trauma. Have I gone off the page? Nearly. Trauma. That's trauma process, all one word, .com. Press on every page, there's a button where you can press for a 20-minute Q&A appointment, and you can go onto that page and there's a timetable and you can make an appointment to see if we're a match. Because TRTP is not for everyone. It requires the practitioner to be sure of who they are and to be okay about taking a leadership position with a client. And I know that most psychologists are trained that it has to be cooperative. This is not cooperative work. It's not, what do you think we should do? Well, I don't effing know. If I knew, I'd have done it. So this is connecting with your client, heart to heart, soul to soul. I've got you, and you're safe now. I know exactly what you do. All you need to do is follow my instructions, and you can expect an extraordinary result. Because that's what it would be. Why would we just return you to normal when this is your opportunity to create extraordinary? Because that's what we do. Join us. When you get off this call or tomorrow, get onto the website, make a Q&A appointment, and let's talk. We may be a match, we may not be a match. But maybe we are. And maybe you can make such a difference in your clients' lives because it transforms them, it transforms us as the practitioner. I know I've gone too far. I've gone over time. I'm terribly sorry. I just looked at the clock. No, I'm not seeing clients myself at the moment, Rachel. Yes, if you contact me through the back page of the website, we'll get back to you, Rachel. Back page, contact page, send a message to me and I'll get back to you. Thanks, Judith. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, survivors are extraordinary. Yes, they are. I'm not a survivor. I'm not surviving. I'm thriving. Come and join us. Our practitioners are extraordinary. And that's the other thing, just before I go. At the end of the 8-week training program, that's not the end. You go into the practitioner community, which is warm and rich and kind and generous, and we help each other. We support each other. You'll never work alone again. Thank you. Maybe we'll see you next time. Maybe we'll talk on the phone. Have a great evening, everyone.